Welcome. This is part 2 of a video about data accessors and how to use them in Apex. In the last video, we talked about how to create the data accessor interface and how to create the data accessor itself, in addition to talking about how to implement it in a class. And today, we are going to be talking about how we can use a mock data accessor to mock data within a test class. So, for starters, we'll take a look at this contact data accessor mock that I spun up and get right into the details. So, first, you'll notice that we annotate it with isTest. The reason we want to do that is because we are only going to be calling this from a test context. We will never want to generate mock data within a context that is not a test class, so we want to make sure that we restrict that here. The next thing is, just like in the contact data accessor, we want to implement the contact data accessor interface. The purpose of this is so that when we go to our test class, we can override the initialization of the contact data accessor to instead use the mock data accessor, so that instead of interacting with the database, you're going to be interacting with the lists here. And so each of these lists essentially represents one of the return types of the methods within the contact data accessor interface. So some of the methods return a list of contacts, some return a list of database.save results, and some return database.delete result. And for each test method that we need to get one of those back, we're basically just going to set those equal to a list that we define, a list that we mock, and then we're going to be returning them within our mock data accessor methods. So our first example is we have this get contacts by external ID method. So instead of using a SOQL query, we're going to take the list of contacts to return and okay, hold on. This should not be here. We don't want to initialize the list anew each time we run that method, but instead what we want to do is loop through the list of contacts to return that already exists, and then if the external ID of the contact is in the external IDs that we sent in as a parameter, then we want to add that contact to the list of contacts to return. And oh, hold on. That's the issue. So the problem here is we have the same list. So we don't want this to be named contacts to return and this to be named contacts to return. So instead, we will call this contacts with ID. We had a duplicate variable there. So fixing that, we should get something more like this. So the contacts with ID list will represent each of the contacts that has an ID that matches one of the IDs in our set, and then we'll return that list. And so this essentially works the same way as the query, but instead of getting those contacts from the database, we're going to be storing them in this list and then returning the ones that match. Similarly, we have 3 methods for updating, inserting, and deleting contacts. In each of them, we take that list of contacts and the Boolean, which we're not really going to be using in the mock data accessor because we're not interacting with the database, and so the variable is essentially pointless because none of them will cause any problems. So all we really need to do here is set this .contacts to return equal to contacts, and then return the results to return. So within our test class, we'll basically be setting the results to return to something and then ensuring that we get that back, and this will need to set the contacts appropriately. And then insert and delete work the same way, but for delete contacts, we're setting our contacts to return to an empty list, and we're returning deletions to return instead of results to return. But that is all for the data accessor mock. So let's get into how this is used within the test class. So here, of course, best practices, we want to annotate with isTest, and we want the methods to be annotated with isTest. You can also use test method, but I prefer the way this looks, so I use it. And then our first test method will be testing the getContact method from my first REST endpoint. And if you remember, that's the one that gets the external ID of a contact and then returns the contacts with that external ID. So here we will create a new contact and give it an external ID and a first and last name. Then we initialize the mock contact data accessor. We set the list of mock contacts to the inserted contact here and here, and then we set the contact DA in my first REST endpoint equal to the mock contact data accessor. So after this setup, we have essentially said, instead of using the contact data accessor, which interacts with the database, we're going to use the mock data accessor, which contains this contact we created in a list. And then we create our REST request and use 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 as the external ID that we're looking for, and then start the test, and the retrieved contact should equal my first REST endpoint dot get contact, and then we ensure that the contact isn't null and that the name matches what we set here. And so this test does not interact with the database at all, but it still ensures that the getContact method is taking in the external ID and that it's retrieving the contact that has that external ID. Now, the one piece that we don't test is that database interaction, which we will instead be testing in contact data accessor test. And it's worth noting that we can generally trust Salesforce to always have SOQL queries working, because otherwise we would have much bigger problems than our test class failing. So here, instead of using DML operations, we just feed in an empty set of external IDs, and we run contact da.getContacts by external ID and pass in that empty set, and then verify that we don't get any contacts back. And this sort of empty test method will work for getting the test coverage up on your contact data accessor. It'll cover this line, or rather this line, and that's all we really need to achieve, because the only thing the contact data accessor will contain is something that we know will work because Salesforce ensures it. So then back to the more rigorous test class, we have a second test method to look at for the create contact method. And if you remember in my first REST endpoint, the create contact method just takes in a submitted contact and then inserts it into the database. So here, all we really need to verify is that we get that contact correctly from the REST request. And so we're going to initialize the contact, initialize the REST request, perform most of the same operations here, but this time we need to create a list of database.save results called results to return, and we need to set the results to return in our mock contact DA equal to that list of results to return. And then we call our method that we're testing, passing in the contact to insert, and we verify that the list of contacts within our mock contact DA is non-empty, and that'll essentially serve the same purpose as indicating that we have successfully inserted a contact into the database. But of course, in this test context, it's mocked instead of truly going to the database. And after that, we just assert that it's non-empty. So if you are interested in proving your understanding to yourself, you can go ahead and create test methods for the update, upsert, and delete contact methods. But that is all I have for you today, and I hope this helped. Please. Congratulations! You've learned how to use data accessors in Apex to query, insert, update, and delete records in the Salesforce database. I hope it was helpful. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss other videos by me and my colleagues. See you next time.